have you ever had one of those games or ties that makes you so angry that you want to throw your PC out the window? I know, right? We've all been there. But have you ever seen someone else have one of those games that makes you want to throw your own laptop out of the window? Welcome to Malta. We're in the business of misery, and business is good. We've had an absolute dumpster fire of a season. It's not all bad, but if you are a fan of Schadenfreude, then my friend, you are in luck. So after you've caught up over here, join us over on stream as we try to navigate what is going to be a very difficult summer for reasons that you're going to find out in due course. VODs are on the second channel, you know the drill by now, but on a complete side note, I'm actually working on a video at the moment that is essentially a Champions League, but it's only for second tier teams from their nations. We've got a database and it's actually working perfectly, which is fantastic, so expect to see a video about that later in the week. But for now, back to Malta. As we came into season 20 of Building a Nation with Sirens of Malta, off the back of what could be only described as a very solid season, albeit disappointing in places, but still really good ground in which we can build. This year it was a case of stabilisation, given that we knew we would be losing an 18.5 point year from 5 seasons ago. There was really little chance for actual progress this year. It was more a case of just trying to limit the damage, essentially, whilst we kept plugging away to try and finally win that first elusive Champions League title. It's been 20 years, I feel like the old lady in Titanic at this point. If I throw this in the ocean, is that going to help? But when we do get there, hopefully I'll actually remember that it happened. So yeah, Valencia, haven't really seen much of them in Europe in this save, I don't believe. He says while hovering over the 2 Europa Leagues that they've won. Which brings us on to our first point of contention. And that is, as we begin to talk about transfers, we need to explain some other stuff first, because something has happened and it's not good. So you may recall 10 years ago in the save, our player values and the team and everything was building up very nicely. We had our team sort of worth in the sort of, mid 10 to 20 million pound range for players at that stage. And then all of a sudden, they all shot through the floor and everybody was worthless, and it sucked, and it took a long time for it to sort of rebound. It took 4 or 5 years to really recover from that, but we thought the worst is out the way and we can focus on the rest of the save, and that was until this summer where the exact same bloody thing happened, but so much worse. Now in actuality, what it's done is the exact same as before. The difference is what the values are dropping down from is now massively catastrophic for us in so many levels, which you're going to see permeating throughout the rest of this video. To just give you an idea, as I don't actually have a screenshot to show you, we have players like Maltese and our big centre-backs, who tend to be some of our key players, worth in somewhere around the range of 150 million pounds. At the start of this season, all the values dropped through the floor, and now those same players were worth 3 million pounds. Now, as for why this happens, we initially thought it would be something to do with the custom databases, but then when talking to other people, this has happened in vanilla databases that were just using lower leagues around Europe. Especially in Europe, it seems to happen. Not when you're in like the top 10, 15 leagues, but when you start a little bit lower than that, it just seems to happen randomly. Now, the only logical conclusion we can come to is that something is resetting values. Well, clearly, but we don't exactly know why or what it's happening, but it has happened twice in this save now, and almost exactly 10-year intervals as well. Now, since the league's reputation is growing throughout that, we don't believe it's to do with the league's reputation. We suspect that somehow it might be something linked towards the country itself's reputation, but we simply do not know. On the plus side, they do of course rebound, and we believe from what other people have told us that the second time it happens, because it happens twice, it actually does rebound a lot faster. But in the meantime, we've had to make some very drastic decisions based around the fact that our players essentially have no value, unless you get loads and loads of transfer bids on the player, and eventually the value just gets bidded up by those teams. But otherwise, they're worth absolutely nothing as a base value. As you'll see when I show profiles of players later in the video, as we're going to be doing a little bit more on these sort of the stats and stuff today and player progression, so you'll get to see exactly how bad some of the values have gone. I mean, I like a challenge, but come on FM, help me out here. We already chose Malta, for crying out loud. But this has meant, of course, that we've had to take a different transfer strategy, because we could no longer rely on the fact that we'd actually be able to sell players for any kind of decent money, which has severely limited the amount of money which we've sort of been able to spend this season because of FFP. If we were to go through a couple of seasons of eating into the bank balance that we have of nearly 200 million pounds, when we came to the end of that 3-year cycle, we would get absolutely slammed by FFP, as we'd be unable to sell players to recuperate that money, which is exactly what we've had to do, because obviously being a smaller league, we don't get the same kind of sponsorship money and other money that the bigger leagues do, so we really do have to rely on competition prize money as well as actually selling players in order to keep ourselves afloat. This also put us in a slight pickle, because of course we have players specifically that we try to flip on for money, as it's the only way we can stay afloat, and of course that ruined that plan for this summer, and it meant we were actually stuck with some very expensive contracts that we needed to get rid of on the cheap, and we've had to do exactly that. And now let's talk about the players that have left. So a couple of quick outs, the first of which was Alberto Uribe, who went to Al Khalil over in, I believe, Saudi. In fact, it literally says it right there, for £3.4 million. And you can sort of see, this is the kind of player that he was on loan last year, I believe, for a reasonable amount. And we were hoping to sell him for at least 10 million, 10, 15. This was the highest we managed to get for any of these guys, but it was just money. And the main reason we got rid of these guys wasn't even that we desperately wanted to sell them. The idea was we would just hang on to them, wait for the values to bounce back, and then sell them then to not lose too much money. Now, they were all free transfers, but you could see the wages would be eating in. The biggest problem was, because these guys had relatively high squad statuses, which they were never expected to actually fulfill, it meant that players were complaining about them being left out of Champions League squads, and it was harming the morale of the team massively, so we just had to get them gone. It's a real shame, though, because it could have earned us so much money. Same thing happened with Giuseppe Dario, who's gone to Napoli for £1.4 million. You can see he's worth 28 million now at Napoli. He was worth like 20 million last season. We actually got like nearly 10 million for loaning him to Udinese last year, and then ended up selling him for 1.4, but such is life, right? Another one is a player that I didn't even get the chance to introduce you to, Moises Altier. We actually brought him in to be a really solid backup right wing back for us, but the wages were simply too much for us to handle, and we couldn't actually get him in the squad at the time, so he had to go to Lazio as well. Another out, though, is one that we actually did intend to happen, and that was Roy Fleming. Now, we knew that he was never likely to end up being a good player for us. I mean, he's still a very solid player, don't get me wrong, but he was never going to be quite elite enough to be a starting striker for Sirens. But we were actually able to sell him to Sweetie United for 3.9 million. This was actually arranged last season, and it finally went through in the summer. But you can see, hilariously, that the values don't seem to have affected that much the other Maltese sides. It has affected them still a little bit, but nowhere near as badly as it's hit us. And I wonder if that's just because ours were higher to begin with, but it does seem that some of the highest value players in Malta no longer even play for us. And Roy is in fact one of them. He still hasn't declared for Malta. He's been awaiting paperwork now for 2 years, and I think there's a glitch there that's completely prevented him from declaring for Malta, which is a real shame because I feel like he could massively help their strike force and help Malta out. Although, if you're interested in the Malta national team, stay tuned because there's actually some seriously good news for them later on that is genuinely very exciting. And the other out is literally the highest value transfer we made all season in terms of outs, and that is Roberto Santamaria. Now, the idea with him was we actually managed to get Barca to put a £5 million bid in. He was worth like 15 before, but that is not the point. We did at least manage to arrange a 50% of next sale fee, so they should, at least when his value comes to fruition, be giving us another 5 or 6 million on top of that, which is just us trying to find some ways to scrounge up money. Or you never know, he might become a success and they sell him for huge amounts of money. Unlikely. It's more likely they'll just sell the clause to us, but that's how we're going to have to earn some money in the meantime. We are quite literally feeding off scraps. And that completes the outs. Now, this season, as far as ins, it's been very few and far between, with us essentially refusing to spend any reasonable money on players. You know how in previous years I'm like, that's a £17 million Brazilian. He looks really solid. Let's bring him in. We simply can't do that just because we couldn't offset it with transfer sales in the way that we normally do. And as a result, we've really had to be looking at bargains. And in a way, that's kind of that slight adjustment to our transfer strategy has, for me, made it very fun this year because we've genuinely found some very solid players, some of which you won't see right now because they're not joining us to the summer, but I will actually give you a preview of a couple of them because there's some really fun players in there. But let's get started with the ins. I wonder who the highest paid one is. Not highest paid, like highest transfer fee. I genuinely don't know. So the first in was Sergiu Tabakaru. Now, he was actually brought in and had signed essentially before any of this happened, and as a result, we were happy to drop 2.5 million on him because look at the state of this chap here. 17 years old, on loan at Malta this season for the second half of the year after he turned 17. Didn't play a lot for them, and they have now been relegated, so I suspect he'll come back. I'm okay with that. I think he's got legitimately elite potential in. Now, he does have injury proneness, which is a bit of an issue, but no issues with liking big matches. I still think there's a phenomenal player in here, and I'm excited to see what he can become. But 2.5 million now would seem like a lot. Back then, pocket change. We also brought in this guy here, who I really think is a bargain up, the bargain of all bargains. And again, this was prior to that. Lucas Carlson. We found him at VPS, a second-tier side in Finland. I think he was a recruitment focus, but sometimes they do genuinely bring through amazing players. And this guy was free. He was not non-contract, they just had no value to him, basically. We were able to bring him in on free transfer. He's gone out on loan to Gazira United. I think, although he hasn't played that much in the second half of the year, I may well bring him back. I still think there's a good player in him, and he could definitely be one for the future as well. Then the result, Islay, a Hungarian striker who we picked up for £2.7 million from Puskás Academia. Now, the thing about him is, again, it's a similar story, but we picked him up purely based on his striker tent poles, so to speak. He's been fantastic this year out on loan at Goodyear too, and I think it shows that, especially if we're doing a building a nation save, sometimes ignore the stars. If you find a player that's really good, especially strikers that have got the dribbling, finishing, first touch, composure, agility and pace, and decent agility or balance, I think if you find a guy that's even solid across the board on those, sod the stars, get him in. Because on loan this year, he's been fire. 18 goals in 21 appearances for Goodyear across the various competitions this season. And considering they got knocked out very early in the cup, he's basically been just a really solid league striker for them. And you'll see what they've done this year, and he's been part of the reason. And last of the guys that joined us prior to this sort of giant drop in the values happening was Paulo Mateus. Now, I really like him. £2.4 million from Shavs, if I can say powerhouse in Portugal, but he's gone on loan to Hamren. And I think for a 2-star, 5-star chap to get on loan to Hamren, these are the things that dreams are made of. But now to the guys that actually joined us after we suddenly realized we had no money to spend. The first is Afonso Sousa, who I genuinely believe is the most money I spent on a transfer once we realized that we had basically no cash to us. 3.3 million pounds from Moreirense over in Portugal. He's actually wanted by someone. Who's that? Juventus. Again, I feel like we're making good signings here. Now, the weird thing about Afonso Sousa, basically, is that he was wanted. We'd been wanting this guy for a while now. You can see that he's 21 years old. But Moreirense had always wanted like mid £20 million for this guy. And all of a sudden, he signed a new contract there and it put a £3.3 million release clause, to which I went, yeah, I think I'll take that. So we brought him in. He's on quite large wages and as a squad player hasn't played a great deal this season, but enough to the point where he hasn't complained. But I think he has a bright future, even if maybe he doesn't have the highest ceiling. He's the kind of guy that, were our values to not be in the floor right now, would probably be easily worth 10-15 million quid, and it would be a bargain. But things don't always work out like that. See me in 2 years. Next up, though, there is a set of players that we were astonished. They all came through in the same exact scout report. The first of them is, and I apologise if I've messed the name up here, we've been calling him Saggy Vassal. I'm assuring that isn't his actual name pronunciation, but it's a great name nevertheless. 4 caps already at his age is astonishingly good. £1.3 million. He's still a bargain, even with these low player values that we currently have, has even managed to make, well, a single appearance for us in the league, but great heading ability, solid physicals, 6'3", good on both feet, can tackle, his marking and positioning are really solid. The one thing he lacks is a little bit of aggression, but I think he could be a fabulous player in the future, and it wouldn't be us if we weren't signing yet more centre-backs. We're not done with centre-backs yet, by the way, stay tuned. We also brought in John Dominguez for 925k. From Real Sociedad. I love the occasional insanely cheap Spanish release clause player. And again, same kind of temp polls. Gone on loan to Malta, hasn't played. He'll definitely come back because I feel like he could do a good job for someone, but apparently not them. And maybe if they'd played him, they wouldn't have got relegated. The last one of the players that's actually joined us this season that I want to talk about, but I will give you a couple of highlights of the ones that we found over the last couple of months too that are going to be joining us in the summer, is this guy here, who I am very, very excited about. I know he's another centre-back, but we apparently just are like nectar. We're like a honeypot of centre-backs. This is Chosun Won from Ulsan Hyundai. £1.4 million. I'm loving these upward arrows too. He's been out on loan at Tarshin for the second half of the season, but look at him. 16 jumping reach, 6'2", 15 acceleration, which is lovely. Again, with the low aggression on the centre-back. Don't know why we've found so many like that lately, but again, 16 tackling, heading of 12, marking of 15, positioning we could definitely improve on, but that's not a problem there too. I think he could be a genuine banging centre-back one day. These are the sort of guys that we've really had to focus on trying to find, and it's interesting that when we're put in a situation where we have to really start scrounging around for signings and can't just drop 10 million here, 10 million there, we do actually start to find some genuine bargains, which continues into the players that are joining us this summer. I'll try and find like the 2 most interesting ones to show you now and save the rest for next season. So we start with this guy here, Blaj Kral. Now, weirdly, Maribor had an amazing season in Europe this season, and we were wondering why. And then when our team report came through from Maribor, we noticed that almost their entire squad was made up of like what seemed to be back-to-back golden generations of youth players. This guy's only 21, has 19 caps for Slovenia, and is a phenomenally gifted sort of utility man, because he's fast, he's got insane agility, and we know how important agility and balance are in the game this year. Solid tackling, good marking, positioning can improve with time, crossing's not too bad either. He just has insane levels to him already, and not to mention that, good on both feet, can play wing back, could also essentially cover both of our defensive midfield roles too, and we've picked him up for 2.5 million, which is a lot for us at the moment, spread over time that could actually go up to 6, but over the course of like 3 or 4 years. He's the one that I want. He is the one I want. And then we decided to make a big splash. Now, this is a hell of a risk. We are signing Luis Pineda for 8.2 million. He is the biggest signing we're making. He won't join us, of course, till the summer. He was number 1 on the next gen list this year. Now, you're thinking, hang on a minute, you don't play wingers. Yeah, because our idea with him is a little bit not out there. It's fairly complex. It's fairly straightforward, right? This is the idea with him, because he actually has ridiculously good passing and vision, which makes him perfect to be an advanced playmaker in this system, particularly with the physical ability that he has. He's kind of like, he's got the physicals that Padilla wishes that he has. And for 8.2 million, I still think he's an absolutely brilliant buy, but that is a lot of money given our current financial situation with that stuff in mind. I think we can mold this guy into a genuine worldie, so I'm super excited to bring in Luis Pineda. Professional personality, low adaptability, which is a bit of a concern, but hopefully he will be okay. Very excited to get him in next season and really give us a bit of depth behind Padilla, because it really gets there's not a lot there when Padilla's not playing for us, and he is so absolutely crucial, and I do wonder what a guy that could be a bit more mobile could do in that role, and he is going to let us find out. So that about wraps up things as far as the signings in. You can see that it's been fairly fallow, no like massive massive deals, and those that have been made actually haven't even occurred in this season technically. My hope is that I'm essentially leveraging this against the idea that hopefully we'll be able to make a big sale or two if we can leverage up a couple of players just to keep ourselves balanced, because the last thing we want to do is fall out of rich financial status, because then the board will just be like, hello lads, just selling your entire squad. No real tactical changes as far as the actual team this year. We did make one minor tweak which I'll talk about later, but it's really a case of just mirroring stuff. So let's get straight to the league. And we actually shot out like a cannon this season. We'd scored, I think, nearly 50 goals in our first 7 matches. There was like a 9, a 10, an 8 and a 9 in those first few matches. Just colossal wins over everybody. Obviously it faded as the season went on, and annoyingly in the end we ended up once again matching our highest ever goal scoring season with I think this is our 4th time we've scored 112 goals in the league. We only needed 3 goals on the final day to beat it. Nope, 1-2-1. Just how life is sometimes. We do in fact win it by 12 points in the end over Goodyear United. Now, having a player like Zsolt Islay there has made a massive difference, and it's allowed them to be our Champions League competitor this season, which in a way I'm not super fussed about because it means they'll just drop down into the Europa, but they are going to need to take some loans this summer. Now, I believe they have a loan farm manager, you know, one of the guys with the uses loan farm tendencies. That will hopefully help them take some more loans from us this summer, so I feel like they're the sort of team that could be cooking something currently. Hamren, once again, just because this is what they do, come 3rd in the league. That means they'll get guaranteed group stage of the Europa next year. It's like an old pair of slippers for them at this point. Zabar are back into Europe after a little, I think they've had 1 season away, as are Birkirkara. Birkirkara were actually at one point looking very solid for 2nd spot. They've been cooking this year. They've taken a lot of very high quality loans and are building an incredible team that they've got. And I'd be curious to see what they could do in Europe next year in the Conference League, which is where they'll be. The biggest miss though, as you'll see, is Sweetie United. The perennial 2nd place side in this league, who are always 2nd place, absolutely shat the bed this year. Just colossal. They finished, what was that, 8 points off of those spots. Still miles clear of everybody else, but we are crying out for that 6th European spot. The biggest issue with Sweetie coming 6th, though, is that might potentially prevent some players from going back on loan to them because they're no longer going to be in Europe, and that could be a problem. Luckily, they're getting a few permanent signings from us already, which is good, but there is a few loanees that were concerned may not go back, and they've also sacked their manager, who was literally the longest serving manager in the league, even longer than me. He's been there for 20 years, just over 20 years, obviously, and he's now left, but they are looking to replace him with one of the uses loan farm tendency guys, who used to be, I believe, manager of Goodyear United, so there could still be good things on the horizon for them. Melita relegated, Luta relegated even harder, Floriana stay up with the lowest points total ever to stay up in this league, so that's fun. In the 2nd tier, it was a 4-way battle for the title between Nashar, Valletta, Slima and Zebu. I would have loved it if Zebu Rangers could have got in there. 69 points, nice. They were so damn close in the end. Look at the goal differences on that top 4 teams. And look at some of these like goal scorers here. Pereira with 25, Robin Axelvold. I want to just highlight him because I don't know if I showed him when he joined us on, because he was a loan farm kind of guy. But again, these kind of key attributes for that role, 26 in 28. It's delightful. And not to mention Jordan Bessina, 24 assists this season. That is ridiculous. So all in all, in spite of all the negativity around the finances and with us having to take a different tact, we were still pumped because at the end of the day, players being worth a little bit less doesn't really affect how they're going to play on the pitch. Except it kind of does, but just not in the way that you think. And with that in mind, it's time to talk about us in Europe. Now, last season, of course, we reached the semi-final of the Champions League. Our only defeat in the whole of Europe last season was that 2nd leg in the semi-finals. We were brilliant in Europe, and I genuinely believe that our underlying statistical numbers this season are actually better than last year, and I truly believe that we are building towards something brilliant, but I've been thinking that for 20 years now. And this is exactly the type of stuff I mean. First up, away at Real Madrid, a 1-1 draw away from home. Granelli gave them the lead. He's literally one of the best players in the world. If you haven't seen him, how is this fair? How is this allowed to exist? What a you should see some of the guys in the Real Madrid squad. I might just start highlighting one per video like this because there's another guy that's actually better than him. Point being, Palacio got us the equaliser moments later, and I genuinely believe we were equal, if not better, than Real Madrid away from home. It felt like last year we got those really good draws away at elite sides in the group stages, but we were always slightly fortunate to get the draw. This year it felt like it was the opposite. We were getting the draw, and if anything, we were a little unlucky to get the draw, and that was a really nice turning point for us and a huge result, which we then followed up with an even better one. 1-0 at home against Inter. You can see the defensive stability in this game was absolutely phenomenal, just giving Inter absolutely nothing, and we've been so good at doing that, and it really helps. Now, admittedly, underperformance in the strike force in today's game was absolutely immense, and if it wasn't for that Perez goal, we'd have been in real trouble. It was a literal tap-in. He couldn't have missed if he tried, although, frankly, I feel like he could have done. Then we travelled away to Club Brugge. Things were a little bit sort of iffy in this one. It wasn't our best performance by any means. Now, the reason I feel like that this had happened as well is because over the course of the summer, with the values of the players being much lower now, it meant that we were suddenly getting a lot more transfer bids on them, because before, when they were worth prohibitive amounts of money, rarely were sides out of the side of the elite teams trying to bid on our players. Whereas now, every Tom, Dick and Harry was coming in trying to sign everybody for like £1 million, basically. We were getting bids on players that used to be worth 100 million of like 800k. And they were like, I must go, my planet needs me. And as a result, the morale was very difficult to manage, because you simply can't get through that without upsetting a couple of guys, one of whom was Evtim Krustev, who did admittedly play very well here, but has really struggled with morale this season, as has Jozanovic. Because normally we've got about a 90% success rate of turning players to be happy to stay, but it is always an absolute minefield, as I'm sure you're aware. But nevertheless, 7 points on the board, only 1 goal conceded. What more do you want? And then we had this, away at Dinamo Zagreb. It was a very strange game. We found ourselves in a 2-goal advantage through no fault of our own. We'd literally not had a shot on target at that point, I don't think. They scored 2 own goals to give us a 2-goal advantage. Perez and then Pebbles added 2 more to make it 4-0, and we were cruising, and then randomly gave up 2 late goals. I think maybe I'd held off on the substitutes a little bit too long, some tiredness crept in, but you could see, again, not really giving them a lot of chances, but they took what was there. Really just overwhelming performance from us yet again. 10 points on the board after 4 games. Absolutely cruising. I'm feeling good too. And then we had this. This is just one of those games that was so very unfortunate. Yilmaz had given United the lead after 32 minutes. We played brilliantly to get ourselves back into it. Reynoso grabbed us the equaliser, and we thought, you know what, a draw, it's not the worst result in the world, but we definitely deserved more. And then Fernando Alarcon, a player that we'd potentially looked at signing a few seasons ago, scored the winning goal for United. And it was almost the opposite of what we were seeing before, where we were the better side, and just not only didn't get the draw, got a loss this time too. But you can see what I mean about, despite that, the underlying numbers suggest that we were still the better side. Padilla had 7 key passes in this game, but sometimes you're just not going to win every single time, right? So we were still consistent and happy with things are going, but it's still disappointing to have a result like that. But we bounced back and put down an absolutely brilliant performance away at Sporting. 3-1 victory, 2 for Padilla, 1 for Reynoso. They got a late one back, which is disappointing, but it was quite a poor finish, actually. The goalkeeper didn't have the best day there. The only thing about Gutierrez is, and I think this is definitely a problem, I think he's genuinely one of the best goalkeepers in the world. He doesn't like big matches, and I think in the Champions League, as EBFM found out in his tests, that it really does matter in the latter stages or even in the European competitions to have that trait, and I think it does cost us at times. So we are sort of readying a guy who's out on loan at Zabar that in a few years can take over from Gutierrez, and I think that might be a key factor in us progressing, but we're just simply not ready to do that yet. But that was another win. 13 points on the board in 6 games, cruising basically. After Christmas, it got even better. Sirens 6, Sparta Prague 1, 5.81 XG in this game. This was a mauling. These stats weren't dissimilar to when we beat Nordsjælland 11-0. Naturally, we still managed to concede a goal in this game, but that's just how it goes right now. Jozanovic scored, Reynoso with a brace, Yalei, Palacio, Pereira, everybody getting in. Reynoso got 2 goals and 2 assists in this game. He had a 10 out of 10. He honestly should have had more goals in this game. He had 2.8 XG by himself in. He had over half the team's expected goals. Somehow he underperformed. It's incredible, but a 6-1 victory put us to 16 points. I think that pretty much wrapped up qualification 2. We were going into a final match against Milan with a chance to finish potentially with our highest points tally ever. And then this happened. A 2-1 home defeat to Milan. They scored in the very first minute of the game, and the way that the goal was scored, I said to chat at the time, we're not going to win this game, because it was a case of bad misplaced pass after missed tackle after tackle, but ball bounces back to opponent, over and over again until eventually the goal went in. It was literally straight from the kickoff. It was wildness. But then they actually scored an own goal and we got back into it. It should have gone down as our player's goal. It just sort of hit him on the way into the goal when it was already going in. And then we gave away a 94th minute penalty. Because, you know, FM will do that to you. But in the end, the fact is, they were technically the better side. Obviously, non-penalty XG was a lot closer than that, but at the end of the day, we gave away a stupid penalty. Frustrating result, that one. It's the only game that I feel like was a proper bad one, really. And unfortunately, at this time, it was right towards the end of the January transfer window, as a lot more bids had come in for players, and again, the morale had taken a dip. And it was at this point that we had to get rid of a load of those guys, because it was upsetting the squad morale that we couldn't register a load of people that we never wanted to register. That's on us, after all. But I think that was part of the reason why the morale was so low going into this match. I mean, in the end, it didn't actually cost us that much, as we ended up getting 7th in the Champions League with 16 points. A few more goals conceded this year, and a decent amount scored, but you think that win would have put us up into 5th place, and admittedly actually lower than last year, but it would have, I think, been our highest ever points tally of 19. But it's nice to see, like, back-to-back top 8. We look like a team that should be in the top 8 every season now. We are looking very consistent. You can't win every game. It's just one of those things. And Milan, technically, you know, got 22 points. They didn't lose a single match, and they are a very, very good side. So we shouldn't have expected it to be easy, but I feel like we should have done better, because their squad isn't actually that good. It's still very good, but it got us through, and that's the main thing. And we were hoping to avoid the likes of Manchester United and people like that in the next round, and we were blessed with a tie against Dortmund. Now, Dortmund is a weird one, because they're one of those teams that always seem to finish 13th. You can see 13th, 13th, 13th. They're just not allowed to finish anywhere else. And they're usually the type of team that will get through a round or two, but are the sort of team that we should be beating, and we have the last few times we've played them. In fact, every time we've lost to Dortmund, much earlier in the save, it's always been by the same scoreline, 3-0. Something about that, weird. But we felt very, very confident that if we could just get a solid result in the away game and take them at home, we could push through to the next round and hopefully get a really solid draw. And now comes to the part where you may want to just hide your laptops. First leg, away at Dortmund, 3-0 defeat. Foreshadowing. Yeah, and the worst thing was, it was just mistake after mistake from players that don't normally make mistakes, who all have high consistency and who all like big matches, minus our goalkeeper. And I don't really think the goals were his fault. I know he gets a harsh rating, but this one was all mistakes from the defenders. Payas made a mistake, Kadri made a mistake. Just an absolute shocker. Like, I'd have taken a 1-0 defeat here. I felt like we could have turned that around. But 3-0 from these kind of statistics, we were just very, very concerned and worried that it was going to be yet another season of disappointment because of one random result like that. But that's how football works. We did everything we could in the second leg to prepare, praise training, all sorts, to give us the best morale possible to go into that next game and absolutely batter them. That was the idea, and this is what happened. Hold on. Yeah. We drew 1-1. They had 2 shots. A 0.09 XG. Now, I'm not saying we played amazingly in this game. We were fairly solid. On any other day, this is a comfortable 2-0 victory, which would, of course, not put us through anyway. I must mention that. We did have a goal disallowed for offside. We missed an absolute sitter on 2 occasions before Michael Bizarma scored like the most basic goal of all time, just a low-driven shot into the bottom corner to get us that equaliser. They scored a goal, and we know it was 0.08 XG, their goal, because we were staring at that number until the stoppage time moment where they had a absolute long-range strike that just went nowhere, basically. Frustration. I couldn't believe that we'd somehow gone out to that. Holy Lord. It's just like, look up FMing in a dictionary and you've got a picture here. It's just as well we didn't lose, because we were very close to actually losing this game as well. And that would have been, I'd honestly rather have lost in some ways. Just our scoring just almost feels like they're taking the piss. But needless to say, that ended our Champions League journey, and it's such a shame because we were playing so well overall. But I feel like we'll be able to have a better handle on the player morale over the course of the summer this year, because we won't be doing the flip players. Really trying to keep a tight handle on the squad and doing our very best to keep the morale in check, because there's always going to be the occasional player that complains. But generally speaking, we've kind of figured out the formula, and I'll just say it again in case you find yourself in this same problem with players coming to you and complaining. If a player comes to you and they are an influential or team leader, tell them that in the meeting. They will 90% of the time say, yes, boss, I'm happy to stay. What you then get to do with players that aren't influential players is when they come to you, tell them that that influential player was happy to stay. And it works with contracts too. That usually 9 times out of 10 works, unless they've got a really horrible personality, or that's usually the only way around it. And most of the time it works. So the best thing you can do though is stall offers on players until you get a guy that you know you can upset and get him to stay, get him in first, and then you can kind of snowball it from there. It's still not foolproof, but it will really, really help you, I promise. So that meant, of course, that our other Maltese friends were very much going to need to help us carry the weight a little bit, although I do feel like they're sort of Sisyphean pushing the rock up the hill at this point. First up into Europe were Hibernians. Hadn't been in it for a little while, and they'd start in the Conference League 3rd round, and we were a little bit worried, but we actually needn't have been, as they won 6-1, I think it was, over Valmira, sorry, 6-2 over Valmira in that the third qualifying round, before coming from a massive, well, I say massive, a 2-0 deficit against Slavia Prague is nothing to be sniffed at. They got the victory, and it put them into the big group for the first time, I believe, in their entire history, which is dope. Next up, we have Birkirkara, who I already mentioned were absolutely cooking with some of the loan signings that they'd made, and it certainly paid off. 2-0 victories, home and away against Hajduk Split to push them through. Then they faced off against Radnički of Serbia, and, well, actually did lose a game, but managed to pull it around after that defeat before falling at the playoff round of the Europa League against Shakhtar Donetsk. Not really a huge surprise there, but it's better for them to be in the Europa Conference League anyway, as I felt they could have a chance at going really deep, especially if these players keep developing. Hamren, of course, were the team that just goes straight into the group stages of the Europa League. They do it every single season now. They just love 3rd spot. It means they get less games to play, but they're happy with that, it seems. So let's get started with the Conference League. Actually pretty happy with this. Birkirkara in the end come 11th and were fairly solid overall. They got some 3 victories in there. Beat Borac, beat Crvena Zvezda, and they beat Victoria de Gumarães. They won some home games, which is crucial. Got draws against Maccabi Haifa and Newcastle United. Brilliant result there, and did lose to Fenerbahce, which I'm actually surprised. We have a really good record against Turkish sides to get themselves 11 points. They only missed out on getting the top 8 on goal difference in the end, so really happy for them. But also, spare a thought down here, Hibernians, they get through with 6 points, which is usually not likely. Usually I feel like you need the amount of games plus 1 to get into the sort of top 24 and then double the amount of games +1 to get into the top 8. Although admittedly 11 points got them in this year, which is absolutely crazy. In the end, Hibernians did it by 1 goal difference over Slovan Bratislava. They actually only won 1 match the entire time, which was against Radnički, hilariously. Got 3 draws though against Trabzonspor, great result, FK Sarajevo, and would you believe it, Newcastle away from home. Newcastle dropped points against both Maltese sides this season. Not great. I would want to jump in the Tyne at that point, but there we go. Also lost to CSKA Sofia and Celje. Those are the results that irked me a little bit. I felt they could have done better against these sides, truthfully, particularly CSKA Sofia. But it is what it is. They both qualified. They'd be on opposite sides of the draw. And for the first time in this save, this has actually happened, they drew each other in the knockout round. Birkirkara won the away leg by a 1-0 thanks to a goal from Marat Pronin. And in the second leg, well, it was a 2-2 draw, which is better for Hibernians, but Birkirkara progressed 3-2 on aggregate. But they did manage a 2-1 victory in the home game. We just weren't sure that was going to be enough to get it over the line. And in the end, that proved to be the case. That's the wrong one there. Where is it? And there we go. Yeah, they lost 4-2 after extra time. They did... it's so frustrating. They were so close to coming up with it, but those 2 goals from Bayerns in the 113th and 14th minutes there killed them, and so damn close to pushing themselves through. So a little bit disappointing there, but Standard Liège was not going to be an easy tie, and they went, I think, all the way to the semi-finals this season, so that would have been a huge result for them. But let's swing things back round to the Europa League with Hamrun and Sweetie. Now, if you recall, they'd struggled a little bit last season in that tournament, and we needed to see better, and better was exactly what we got from them. 15th place for Sweetie, 17th place for Hamrun. They're not getting top 8 like one of them has done in the past, but they were solidly and never looked in any danger of not qualifying, basically. They were sort of oscillating their places between them. Sweetie with victories against PSV, Osijek and HJK. Naturally got to beat HJK. 3 draws against Dinamo Batumi away. That was a real bad one. Sturm Graz and Real Sociedad. What I will say is it feels like every time a Maltese side plays Dinamo Batumi, they never win. I don't know what it is about Dinamo Batumi, but we cannot beat them no matter who plays them. As for Hamrun, on the other hand, Besiktas away from home, Aikor and Wolfsburg. Huge win for them there. Draws against Fenerbahce and Chelsea, who... yeah, that's one hell of a result away from home for Hamrun. Not the first time they've done that. They actually got a draw against them in the Champions League a few years ago, and they lost to Cluj, Rangers and Tottenham to get themselves 11 points. Now, of course, this means they would be on opposite sides of the draw, but they did at least avoid each other this time around. Hamrun, however, would get the pleasure of playing against a really strong Shakhtar Donetsk side, whereas Sweetie would get the pleasure of playing against Besiktas. Still a tough one, but we have quite a good record against Turkish clubs. And it went well. The first leg, Roy Fleming with the winning goal for Sweetie United to give them a 1-0 advantage. Hamrun got a 1-1 draw against Shakhtar, but we felt that wasn't going to quite be enough because the home form is so important in these knockout stages. Are you ready for some mad results in the second leg? Get hold on to your chair. Shakhtar beat Hamrun in extra time. 6-5 in the end after extra time. So close to getting themselves through. What a result. And then Sweetie beat Besiktas 7-4 on the night. That was just the night score. They won the first leg 1-0, go through 8-4 on aggregate, Juarez with a hat-trick, Fleming with 2, and Kobo and Ferrer getting goals in them as well. 7-4. They did progress to the next round. Unfortunately, they would play Chelsea, and sadly lost the first leg. Only 1-0 at home to Chelsea, but that was really the chance gone, you felt like, as in the second leg. They, again, only lost 2-1 with a goal from Jean Dong-Suk, but yeah, a 3-1 defeat. They certainly matched Chelsea, per se, but they didn't get absolutely clapped by them, which I was expecting. Now, on the coefficients, we've actually not had too much of a hit. This season, we were 6th overall with 14.6 points, but my hope really was that we should be getting into the 16s. When we got those draws and everyone was through to the knockouts, we felt, right, this is a year that we could be getting, we got to be kind of getting a similar year, particularly with losing this. Didn't work out that way in the end. It's still better than this one, and still much better than this one, which we lose next year, so that's a great chance for gains, but we were always going to be struggling a little bit this year. But when you look overall, we stay 7th. The gap to the Netherlands has obviously come down a little bit because we were losing such a good year this season, but what you really want to pay attention to is, firstly, once again, we finish above France, so we close the gap, but it's this. Next year, we're losing 12. France are losing 20.2. We're going to gain 8.2 points on them without playing a single game. We're going to be literally neck and neck with them going into next season, which means if we just have a better season than France next year, which, I mean, historical precedent, the last few years suggest that we can do, we could actually overtake France and get into 6th spot, and that would be massive because 6th spot gives us a 6th team in the sixth team in Europe for next season, or the season after technically. Now, as for the youth intake, genuinely the worst of the entire save at this point. We had 3 F-rated players in the preview, and it turned out to be exactly that. Not a single player even worth showing you, so we shall move on to the data side of things. Now, it's been a weird season as far as data. You can see that it's been a cluster of players all around the same type of goal scoring. Pereira has been insane this season. We ended up using him as a pressing forward after a while, and we reshuffled the tactic ever so slightly to give him more game time, and it's paid off. Like, despite the fact that he has not the best finishing ability, we are working on that at the moment, but he's got great composure and decisions. His physicals are fantastic, and everything else suggests that he is literally world class, and he's still only 22 years old. The plan was for him to be a backup this season, and he's ended up being our top goal scorer. 34 goal contributions across all competitions. Even in the Champions League, where he didn't start that many games, next year he will be. He's been fantastic, just utterly brilliant. I want to show you his progression because you can't not enjoy this, right? It's up 6 in his composure His physicals incredibly are actually improving even more, which is wild considering they were already very good. Dribbling's gone up. Finishing has only just started increasing, but that's because we've only just started working on that. His decisions are brilliant. His off the ball is phenomenal. He's even got solid passing. His technique is brilliant. He's still only 22. I think there's a worldie in him, and a partnership of him and Reynoso, they're only 22 each. Like, they could be our strike force for the next 10 years. And on that note, Padilla, great year again. 21 goals, only 8 assists. It's definitely a drop off on the assist side of things, but it's his best ever goal scoring, or equals his best goal scoring season for us. He is still an elite talent. As always, I say he just lacks that extra little thing there. He's got everything that Granelli has, just none of this stuff here, basically. But he's still absolutely carrying the team on his shoulders at this point. Absolutely love this guy. We may only get another sort of 4 or 5 years out of him being at his absolute prime, but nevertheless, and again, he's not going to lose much of his physical ability, is he? Let's be honest. Bizarre as well has been a bit of a breakout this season. 19 goals. He's a very good player. Actually started getting some Chile caps as well. It's a great strike force that Chile have got. He goes away a little bit in some of the bigger games. His Champions League record's not awful. 1 goal and 2 assists, but I don't know. He just feels like he's put in some clanging performances in the Champions League for us as well. Did score, of course. His only goal was actually that one against Dortmund. So not sure what we're doing exactly with him, but he's a fabulous player. Look at his value. That's absolutely mad. But one player I do want to talk about is Valmir. Now, if you remember last year, I talked about how he'd massively underperformed and I needed him to change things around. With Pebbles being an absolute bellend this year, sadly, he complained about not being able to move for £500,000. You know how it goes with these things. He did eventually sort of come back around, but you can see the the disparity in the number of games they've played. Valmir has been him this year. 12 goals, 11 assists from Segunda Volante. Just what an insane season he's had. So now the point where he's on form up to 4.5-star CA. He has been absolutely wonderful this season to score 12 times for us, albeit all in the league. In the Europe, he's not been amazing, but his ratings have still been solid. He's done a brilliant job for us. As for the assist side of things, Lahovi's been brilliant. 9 goals and 14 assists is absolutely crazy. Pereira, of course, with 12 assists too. Valmir in there too. Gillet with 10, which is very surprising. Palacio, of course, doing bits too. Padilla definitely dropped off a little bit. Krastev is the one, though. 7 assists over the course of 2,000 minutes. It's just not been good enough. He's been one of those players that's been whining all season, and I really do feel like that's affected his form this year. Only 1 goal over the whole year, which is a massive underperformance from him. We just don't have anyone that can really play there other than him at the moment. Vida's not really good enough anymore to do it. Sauerschnig isn't quite there. Hopefully in the summer, with those new guys joining us from Maribor, that could potentially help us. Because in terms of the way the team's lined up, you can see that this is the sort of flipped version. So we had the pressing forward on this side because that means Reynoso can play on his correct foot. In addition, we had to flip the DMs over as well to maintain the balance. But that also meant a lot of the time that Gillet and Valmir would then, of course, be on their correct foot too. So that's generally how we've lined up towards the end of the season anyway. Pereira, Reynoso and Padilla, Valmir and Gillet, mostly of course Krastev in there with Paez, Vieira and Kadri or Jozanovic. Kadri's the one player I feel like if we could get big money for, I'd be willing to sell, because he's actually not as good as he looks to some of the others, and he's often the one making the mistakes. And I feel like we're ready now to have Vieira, Paez and Jozanovic being our backline pairing, or backline trio, with Palacio who can cover if he needs to, because Lahovi's in there as well. Gutierrez, of course, has often started, but it's kind of dropped off a fair amount. And one other player I wanted to sort of focus on briefly is Jose Pablo Pinares. We would love to find this chap alone. He's actually incredibly got a cap for Chile, but that's not why he's famous, because he got a random red card in a league game, which doesn't happen for strikers very often, particularly ones without a competitive streak. And we wondered why. So we watched it, and this is what happened. I like where the highlight shows us lots of stuff we didn't need. It's like those dashcam videos you see on YouTube where you get like a 30 seconds of build-up where nothing happens and then there's an accident. Now, chat, think back. From the top rope. That was so much better than I was hoping for. Now, let's talk about Malta, because I have something to show you. And that is that Malta is up to 122nd. Oh, baby. I actually didn't realize they climbed as far as they did. I must have forgot to attend a game or two of theirs and didn't realize that they'd actually done some quite good stuff. And you'll see why in a minute. Because firstly, Nations League Group C, only lost 2 matches, got 3rd place, were damn close to actually getting a result. They actually got wins against Luxembourg and Slovenia, a draw with Slovenia as well. It was that defeat to, well, it was the defeats to North Macedonia and Luxembourg, really. But that's not where the real good stuff comes in. The real good stuff is this, Euro qualifying. They've already won their first group game away at Georgia, with Fabrizio and Jose scoring the goals for them. But that's not the really good part. Look at this group. England, obviously, Kosovo, Belarus, and Georgia. There is a legitimate chance that Malta could qualify for the Euros out of this group. I truly believe that they can. I think they're better than Georgia because they've clearly already won away from home there. I think they're better than Belarus for sure. Kosovo is going to be the one, basically. If they can get good results against Kosovo, and so what happens against England, they'll probably beat everybody. It's such a weak group for England to beat everybody. I truly believe there's a chance that Malta could get second, could actually qualify for the Euros. And I promise you, if Malta do qualify for the Euros, I will manage them at the Euros, even if we have to add like a new manager to them to make that happen, because that would be an incredible achievement for someone like Malta. 122nd in the world. field. So now to the loan farm. Ridiculously, despite my insistence that we are actually trying to strengthen the loan farm and drop the number of players in it by selling it, it has actually gone up. That's just because some of the players that we were selling are on 2-year loans, so they won't go until the end of the loan. So as a result, we're actually up to 316 loans now. It's ridiculous, and the game actually crashed at one point when I tried to offer a load of players out. That's how many players are on. We have over 400 players on our books now, which I will talk about in a second as well, because I want to show you something. As for the players out on loan, the highest goal scorer, I mean, you can see how many of those guys that were on loan at the second tier, all of those guys there. In fact, no, literally, the top 4 players here were all on loan in the second tier, all got 20 goals. And Renato also got 20 goals, and he's moving permanently. Some others were pretty close too. Islay was the top scorer of all the top flight players on loan. I mean, that's an insane season as well for him. Absolutely brilliant to see. But look at the state of this. There is just some true quality. And what I want to do is sort of highlight a couple of the best players, so you can actually see their profiles for once, because I feel like I gloss over that sometimes. So you're going to get a chance to see some of the best guys that are on loan in Malta today. The first of whom is Godfred Atta, or would certainly be getting close to playing for us. He could probably be the perfect backup to Gert Gillet, but 30 caps for Ghana, still only 21, plays for Hamrun. He's the kind of guy that could carry them so hard. Then we have Alejandro Bagoa as well. And the reason he's so good is because he has declared, or he's about to declare for Malta. We believe it can happen. It's awaiting the paperwork, much like Roy. I'm hoping that it actually happens. Last player in this bunch I want to highlight is Alexander Latarat, because he was the guy that I said potentially could be our goalkeeper long term. Because I think the one thing that's missing from Gutierrez is that big game mentality. So the thing that I actually wanted to show you, and I've realized this episode might actually be longer than I thought, because we've kind of touched on some other things, but I thought you might like to see some different things around it as well, considering there wasn't as many transfers that were sort of worthy of talking about this time around. And that is the way that the wages break down as far as the loan farm, because I get a lot of questions about how we can afford to have this number of players, and I want to sort of show you how. We spend £1.8 million a week on wages, which is obviously massive, but when you look at some of the big European side, it's still nothing. And I think the way that we've managed to maintain that, you'll notice as well, we have no star players, some important players, but those will probably change down as well. Only one regular starter, and most of our key players are on squad player status. Where the real fun is the number of players that we have on youngster contracts. That is the loan farm, pretty much. The loan farm is basically youngsters, future prospects, emergency backups, and fringe players. So the emergency backups and fringe players are the guys that have aged out of being prospects, but we still want to keep around in the loan farm. So they usually accept these relatively niche contracts. And you can see that we've got 233 players here, and we are paying £94,000 a week. Same with the future prospect. There's a lot less of them. A lot of these guys are more likely the 5-star guys that haven't got loans yet, because they're actually legitimately very good. The breakthrough prospects, again, it's a similar story. Emergency backups, there's a lot more sort of loan farm fodder in there, and a few of the fringe guys as well. They often demand a little bit more cash because they've got a bit of uppity about these sort of things. So you can see their average basic wage is much, much higher. So on the talk of finances, you can see FFP is actually negative at the moment. And this is the thing we've got to worry about, basically, because we've lost money this year because it's just been impossible not to, particularly with us losing around £40 million in prize money. Now, we will get a little bit more towards the very end when the Champions League solidarity money comes in, but it's only going to be like 10 million. And what that means is that it's going to be very difficult for us to spend large amounts of money on transfers, given that we have no way of recouping that money. The hope is that we go deep into the Champions League this year. The balances come up a little bit in terms of the player values, and we're then able to hopefully parlay a couple of guys into big moves. But that's going to be very, very tough, because even with the lots of interest in the players, it's still very much difficult to build that up. I would like to try and sell Kadri for like 50 million if I can, but it really has put us in a bit of a pickle, because the FFP situation is pretty much untenable if we can't sell anybody for any money, basically. So the aim for next year is to finally catch a break in Europe, get back into where we should be, keep the play going well, hopefully try and manage the squad morale a little bit and be a bit more frugal with our transfers over the coming seasons again, and try and get back up there as well. Have to see what happens with Sweetie United this year as well. Those loans could be absolutely crucial if they don't work out. So that's what we're going to be doing over on stream right now. Apologies if this was a slightly longer one than normal, but I figured you guys seem to want more information, so there's really no reason in me hiding it from you in any way. I wanted to sort of give you a detailed breakdown of some other areas. And if there are any other things you want to see, again, as always, let me know in the comments and I'll try to incorporate them into the videos where I can. So yeah, drop a like, subscribe if you're new. Video coming up later in the week with the second tier Champions League, and I'll see you guys very, very soon over on stream. Hold your gun. Capybara. Bye-bye.